Welcome, AP World History students. There's been a change this year, 2019, in the curriculum, and AP World will no longer be from cavemen to present. They're going to move it from 1200 to present, so more of a modern history. However, we want to make sure that we have context because the things that happened in the past are very important to the things that we're going to study about. So we're going to just go back and review very quickly some of the most important things. Okay, so let's start off with the Paleolithic age. Paleo meaning old, Stone Age, versus the Neolithic meaning new Stone Age, out of Africa theory. The theory at this moment seems to point to humans first coming into being here in Africa and spreading out in all directions from Africa. You can trace the arrows here. Of course, famously for Americans, we see that they crossed the land bridge up here in Asia, coming back down in over here and populating the Americas. And that'll be important for later on. Now, what are some of the characteristics of Paleolithic peoples? Well, they were nomadic. And that's a term you need to know. That means that they moved around. They didn't have permanent dwellings, no permanent homes, no brick homes, of course. And basically, they're following the herds. Hunter-gatherers, that's the type of people that they were. Half the people would be working on hunting, while the other half, usually women, would be gathering. Now, that's important because in this time period, there was full equality. Women were on equal footing with men because they were responsible for bringing as much or more food home for the clan. You know, these clans are small, kinship-based, anywhere from 25 to about 75 people in a clan. And, it was easier to gather roots and berries and stuff like that than it was to hunt. Those of you who are hunters know you go out there with your modern rifle and your scope and everything, and you still might not be successful. These nomadic peoples were out there hunting first with spears and then eventually with bow and arrows, but certainly not on the level that we have today. So hunting was never a guarantee. They didn't really have full-time leaders or specialized occupations. Everybody just kind of helped out. So much of their time was spent on feeding themselves, and that's why the clan numbers are really low, is because you can't afford to feed a bigger population. It's just you simply can't get your hands on enough food to do that. And you don't have time to specialize in doing anything like becoming a weaver of rugs or a carpenter or anything like that. That's going to come later. They had language. This is one of the things that made the human being superior to the animals, is that we could communicate. We could set up traps and ambushes on our prey, but we had no written language in this time period. No one had developed one, so this is what we call prehistory, before written history. Fire was a very important innovation in this time period. The use of fire in cooking our food and helping protect us from wild animals was pretty important. Now, one of the most, if not the most important event in human history, arguably, could be the Neolithic Revolution. And this will put us into the New Stone Age. And this happened about 10,000 years ago. The reason it happened was the domestication of plants and animals. We believe that it was women that found this out. More because they were hunters and gatherers. And a scenario that scientists play out, and historians play out, is, these nomadic groups would, they would often go in circles, following a pattern. And, think of it, you're sitting there eating watermelons, wild watermelons, and you don't like the seeds, so you spit them out. And you notice the next time you come around that where you spit those seeds, watermelons grew. And then begin to realize that the seeds were the reason for growing them. Then they begin to purposely plant the seeds to grow, say, watermelons or something else. And they realize that that's what makes everything go round. And so we domesticate plants. Then we take animals like sheep and goats and cows and chickens, and we domesticate them for food. Now, that's incredibly important. You have to know this. incredibly important because that will lead to permanent dwellings. We begin to have farming villages, homes made of sticks and wood, and eventually hardened brick. Um, with that became more food, and populations blossomed and grew. All right. There's a lot going on here, and we are really just dabbling in it. We're not getting into a whole lot of detail, but you need to know the big picture stuff. Now, how did agriculture change human life? It changed it probably more than anything else ever has. One could be seen as negative, less egalitarian. When we began farming, the farming took a bigger person. It used heavy machinery that was more difficult for women to use. So men became the primary food winners, and this gave them power and leverage over women. So this is going to be the start of women being pushed into roles of raising the children, staying in the home, and things like that that we're going to talk about really for thousands of years. It also spread diseases because where people congregate in large numbers, diseases arise and they spread more easily. When you're spread out all over God's creation, you don't see enough people to get them sick. But here people are concentrating in the hundreds and in the thousands. And because of this, you get things eventually like the plague and measles and smallpox and things like that. So two negative ones really starting off the Neolithic age. However, let's look at the progression. What began as very small villages, your nomadic groups basically turned into a settled group of a village. But as their food supply rose, it attracted other groups to their village. And over time, villages became small cities. Cities, continuing the same pattern, continued to grow and get structure and governance, and they began civilization. Now, there are some characteristics of civilization that you should know, such as specialized labor. Now, because it doesn't take everybody gathering food, you can have, say, 10% of your population farming, and that 10% of your population supplies the food for 100% of your population. This means it gives people time to be a professional, whatever, a weaver, a carpenter. You got people out there thinking up ideas. Inventions happen because we have time to think, to just sit and think, and we're not constantly worried about food sources. So specialized labor is a big time offshoot of civilization. This also is how we begin to develop writing. Again, you have somebody with an inventive mind who has time to sit and think instead of always searching for food. And they begin writing the first languages. And we'll talk about that in another section, what the first written language was and some more details about it. Again, big key here is population increases. Civilization is growing. Doesn't mean everybody's going to be that there's no nomadic people out there. There are still many nomads out there. And that's, you see this in some of the continuity. Continuity means things that stay the same. Yes, there's been a huge change with the Neolithic Revolution, but everything hasn't changed. Pastoralism is a word you should know. Semi-nomadic peoples who herded animals. They foraged, but did not practice agriculture on a large scale. These people were seen as barbaric by people who lived in the cities, and oftentimes the nomadic peoples would see the people living in cities as weak sheep, as they would call them, because it was a harder life to be a nomad. And so they saw themselves as tougher people. You live in a city, you're soft. I mean, your food is right there for you. You don't have to struggle for anything. And so these two groups of people were not good friends. And the nomads, when they were hungry, they're coming after the cities because they know the cities have food. It's like a big blinking neon sign saying food here. And so, of course, cities would have to build walls and protections against nomadic peoples. Sometimes they were successful and sometimes they weren't. Most of these semi-nomadic peoples came out of the grasslands of Central Asia. That's where these people first domesticated horses. And it's a cool story what they think might have happened there. They believe that these horses have been a food source throughout human history. They were hunted just like, bison or woolly mammoths or anything else. And then they believe that these Central Asians, you probably had a group of teenage boys out there, thrill seekers who are bored, daring each other. Okay, I want to see if you can ride that horse. Why would you do such a thing? That's food. But they did it, and over time they realized that the horse was more important as a beast of burden than it was as a food source. And the horse changes humanity's history tremendously. It allows us to conquer and create empires. It allows us to, build bigger projects and stuff like that. What was the impact of pastoralists? They degraded the grasslands by overgrazing, but they spread ideas and technology quickly. An example being the Hittites of Central Asia. These crazy people discovered how to smelt iron ore and create iron, which was much better than bronze, which was the metal that came before it. Bronze was expensive, and it wasn't as good of a metal as iron was. Iron essentially going to be steel, is what it was. Okay, so that's all for the first section of notes that you'll need to know. We'll come back in another segment, and we'll talk about the rise and fall of civilizations.